Aspect of Charon is becoming one of my favorite builds in Hades, mostly because it's very fire and forget. So if you like blasting your enemies from safety, then this is very much a build for you. On the other hand, if you hate the cast, maybe this isn't a build for you. Now today I'm going to get into one specific way to build Aspect of Charon, but there are several. You can either use a cast from a god like Hestia, or Demeter, Fire and Forget. Or you can do Zeus, which is the Omega cast version that I'm going to be talking about, because the single target damage on this version is the best. But you can also go with an Apollo version where you take advantage of the unique cleave cast mechanic from Aspect of Charon. For full disclosure, this build doesn't do that. It's just about dropping your Omega cast and letting it sit there for +3 extra seconds due to the additional duration from the aspect. So while this does utilize Aspect of Charon, it sort of also doesn't, which means you can leave your aspect at rank 1. That said, there's a chance in the future that I will be talking about a cleave cast version, so get subscribed, leave a like while you're down there, that way you won't miss that video. But for now, let's get into how this run went. So first up, right off the start in Erebus, I got an epic boon. Okay, my Storm Ring's set, I don't need anything else, everything else is gravy, at least in terms of my damage. Defenses, life, yep, that's going to be the focus for the rest of the run. The Zeus cast does incredible damage per second because its bolts strike 4 times per second. The downside of this is that it's single target, so swarms can be its weakness. Luckily, you're still using Zorophet, and the Moonstone Axe has plenty of ways to turn crowds into a fine red pulp, usually by spinning to win. Now for this one I had access to both Hestia and Hera, both of which provide much needed utility along with AoE options. You can use Hestia with your Omega attack to scorch everything in a large radius, or you can put Hera on your attack, which will hitch enemies, causing them to take damage taken by other hitched enemies. In other words, turning your entire Omega cast into a massive AoE, which is exactly what the Doctor ordered. But I may have been a little too eager to grab some of these boons. I am doing this on Fear 16, which is fairly challenging, and one of the things I'm doing is sealing away a portion of my magic every time I get a boon based on its rarity. Then I saw the Zeus boon, which gave me Chain Lightning on attack. And yeah, I had to have it. And I kinda didn't worry about the fact that I was going to seal away all my magic, which I definitely should have thought about, because it led to the longest and most painful Hecate fight that I've done in a very long time. Turns out, if you are playing an Omega cast build, and all the boons you've taken up until this point are Omega cast, you probably shouldn't be locking yourself out of using your Omega cast. This run's gonna be a little bit rough. But hey, at least when I finally solve all this, I'll have the power of Chain Lightning. And if you play well, you're able to take down Hecate without issue, even if your damage is downright atrocious. But this doesn't exactly show the build in its best light, given this is something that's known for prodigious single target. Don't worry, it's coming soon. So going into Oceanus, I had only one mission: find enough magic to spam my Omega moves again. And I was really fighting for my life and taking it slow in the first few rooms. In fact, it was about the first half of Oceanus. This is why I make mistakes and talk about them in the video, so you don't have to. Admittedly, my greed did end up paying off, because about halfway through Oceanus, magic. Not only one magic, 2 magic. So I was pretty much set for the rest of the run. My build has now come alive, and hey, I even got a fountain room to restore a bunch of health. I guess you could say the fates felt sorry for me and my poor decision making. From here on, the strategy is nice and simple. Drop a cast, let it melt stuff, spin to win when I need AoE. Drop another cast, let it melt stuff, spin to win when I need more AoE. And going into the Sirens, I picked up Hestia's attack for the AoE that I needed. Now, whenever I spin to win, it stacks a powerful dot in the form of Scorch. So it's time to focus on defenses from here on out. Oh, and by the way, if you were wondering what my damage looks like when I don't completely gimp the build, here's a little bit of the Sirens fight. I had no trouble melting through their health this time, because yes, the weapon is good, the aspect is good, having the high tier Zeus boon is also very good. It's just that I needed to be able to use my Omega cast to deal all the damage. And now that I fixed that, in fact, also improving things because I can drop my Omega cast, then do an Omega attack for even more single target damage via Scorch stacking, I was feeling really comfortable. Now the fields have some of the most dangerous enemy combinations, especially if there's a few Tartarus foes mixed in. There's a lot of ranged enemies, and they're mixed with buff melee foes, who, for whatever reason, even when you freeze them, still are able to do damage in the radius around their attacks. And when they're armored, oh boy are they a considerable challenge. Or at least, they would be if this build wasn't super OP, because I really didn't have that many issues with them. And continuing on, I even picked up a healing hex, because I noticed I was taking a little bit of damage here and there, which I could have solved by playing better, but I would rather solve by just healing myself. When I decide to seriously clear Fear 32, then I'll probably get good, but right now I have found Fear 32 to be incredibly brutal because you don't have the option of extreme measures. You can't make the bosses harder, so you have to stack modifier on modifier on modifier that makes the trash downright terrifying. And fun fact, about 3/4 of the way through the fields is as far as I've gotten on my best Fear 32 run, at least so far, though again I haven't tried very hard yet. And so then I got to the Cerberus fight, and I started to notice a pattern here, where I was taking the unnecessary damage when I was charging up my Omega attack. If I just dropped my cast and ran away, guess what? I didn't take the damage. So maybe it turns out that the problem wasn't my build, it was my own greed. Needless to say, I still took out Cerberus without any issue by playing safe more towards the end of a fight, rather than taking the damage like I did in the beginning. With that down, it's on to Tartarus, and victory felt pretty certain at this point. Now in Tartarus, there are so many swarms of enemies, and because there's so many swarms of enemies, I was using my Omega attack a lot more. Basically, I'd throw out my cast, use it to break armor, then use Omega attack to hit as many things as possible. Rinse and repeat until the things are dead. And in comparison to a lot of the other runs I do, this ended up being more of a straight shot. I didn't find as many options for side rooms, and I also didn't really feel like I needed them. So instead, it was time to beeline straight to Kronos. And for Kronos, I had a plan. That plan was, play it safe, don't worry about getting greedy with my Omega attack, use that on ads occasionally because I can stagger them with my hits, but on the boss itself, let my cast do the heavy lifting. And so long as I let my cast do the heavy lifting, I wouldn't have any problems at all. Usually, I struggle quite a bit in Kronos' first phase. This is mostly because I'm bad at judging his attacks, and also because sometimes his attacks can be a little bit mean, especially when you're trying to use Omega moves. But here I found that it was surprisingly easy, because I could drop the cast, move away, wait for the cast to tick him down, drop a new cast, move away, wait for the cast to tick him down. Turns out this is where the safety turned into a huge advantage. So before I knew it, I was off into his second phase. And in his second phase, it's all about positioning. This is the part that I'm much more comfortable with, and I had more than enough damage to deal with him very easily. In fact, in terms of his attacks, I didn't take all that much damage. Now, my damage fell off a little bit when he started summoning ads, but this wasn't because my damage just fell off. It was because the ads were temporarily absorbing the damage, getting zapped out of existence, and then the damage was going to go back on the boss. So this was a sacrifice that I was perfectly fine to make, as it allowed me to keep progressing smoothly. While this build is extremely flexible, and you don't need any specific boons outside of a good cast, I much prefer the Zeus version. The reason I prefer it is that single target damage. The Hestia and Demeter versions clear much better. They don't need any secondary skills to clear, and in particular, Demeter's provides a lot of safety by freezing everything immediately. The only problem there is she doesn't have as much damage as the other variations. I think technically the Apollo variant is about the same damage, maybe even a little bit more, since it does basically the same damage but isn't AoE. However, my problem with the Apollo variant is that you have to actually detonate the cast, or cast the Omega cast, and wait for it to end. Neither of which is that easy, especially in a fight like Kronos, so I tend to find myself taking much more damage when playing that version. But now let's take a closer look at the boons I got throughout this run. So that was defeating Kronos with Aspect of Charon. It's basically AFK to win, and I don't think I would have even popped one Death Defiance if I hadn't made the pro gamer move of, standing in the insta-kill mechanic that hits you for 1,000. But Stormring was absolutely carrying my damage, which is kind of terrifying, given that it's only level 4. 70 damage every 0.25 seconds turns out is quite a lot. Now the ads, of course, threw a small wrench in the work, as they always do, because my only way to AoE was to charge up my attack, and I couldn't quite drop my cast and also charge up my attack while dodging all the things, because, Kronos doesn't really let you dodge stuff. He kind of masters time. It's his deal. So that's a little bit harder. On any other fight, I would be able to clean them up without issue. Even then, I was nowhere near failing, because I had 16 health left, which, based on a previous attempt, is more than enough to beat the fight. But also I had 3 Death Defies, so even if it wasn't enough, I was going to be fine. Now, I wasn't doing any cast cleaving with my special on Aspect of Charon. Reason being, if I want my cast to do all my damage, all I'm using Aspect of Charon for is the plus 3 seconds. And yes, I tested this. It does last longer when you have Aspect of Charon. So that's all that's for. You can do this with the Hestia one, the Demeter one. I just prefer the Zeus one because, oh my god, the damage it does is absurd. And then you've got Excruciating Chasm, which causes the cast to deal 71% damage. Good old Chaos Boon. And Gale Force. I happen to RNG my way into this from Echo. Having the Cyclone is very nice for quality of life and slowing enemies down. But what I really like about Aspect of Charon, and why I think it's very beginner friendly, is you need Storm Ring. That's it. You don't need any Daedalus upgrades, you don't need any boons from any other gods. Having other boons from other gods, like a way to AoE from Hera, a way to get extra CC from Demeter, any of those things, maybe more AoE from Apollo and you just melee stuff, all that's nice. But you don't need it. You don't need any duo boons. You basically don't need anything except for Storm Ring, and it works out of a box, and it's either this or Aspect of Pan that I'm going to take into my 32 heat attempts, because this is that powerful. Now, I was mostly AFKing throughout the fight with Kronos. I'd drop my cast on him, then I'd run away. Then I'd drop my cast, then I'd run away. The things that I wanted to avoid, number one, anything that caused my cast to follow me. The whole point is to drop it on an enemy and run away. And two, anything that causes my cast to project into a different location. While that is quite handy for normal enemies, makes Kronos a bit harder. And then in terms of fear, this is what I had, plus Vow of Blood for extra damage. So basically I was priming stuff, that's why I ran into a little trouble around the start of Oceanus. Good old 16 fear. And then I've also got my pretty much standard deck here. I use two different decks, one of which is, I'd call it the standard non-Omega skill deck, which doesn't have any magic recovery, and then this one, which does have magic recovery. But in short, it's Sorceress, Titan, Swift Runner now that dashes instant, I really like that, Eternity Boatman, those are the core, and I build things out around that, because of course, I want extra stuff. This time I did get champions for free, that was activated via a Keepsake. So overall, I had a lot of fun with this one. I think it's a really beginner-friendly playstyle, and if this is going to be the build that carries you through your first Kronos, good luck. In fact, this build is also incredibly effective against Eris, especially the version where you have Hestia available and you pick up her sprint, because her sprint automatically destroys projectiles. But if you want to know more about how that works, I have a dedicated video which I'll link and you can watch after this. Much like with the Aspect of Momus, a build I've covered in the past, the reason I like this one so much is just the safety. You don't have to get near enemies, you don't have to spend a lot of time DPSing. And if you're feeling clever, you can even block enemy attacks with the Axe's special. Just be aware of the animation locking, where sometimes it can be a little bit too easy to get locked into the attack version of the special, i.e. the Omega special, and take damage in the swap between the shielding effect of a regular special and the damaging effect of the Omega. But if you're looking for a powerful, beginner-friendly, and incredibly fun build in Hades 2, you can't go wrong with Zoraphet and the Aspect of Charon. But if you want to see some more of the builds that I've played, links to those are up in the card and down below. Now before I go, a special thanks to my patrons and channel members for the continued support. For as those $1 a month, you can make videos just like this one possible. Link to support is down below. And a big thanks to everyone who watched to the end. I'm glad you enjoyed the video, I hope you learned something, good luck on your next run, and I'll see you in the next one.